Morning, everyone. I'm Allison Van Dyke. I'm the Executive Director of the Temple of Understanding. And I want to welcome you all to this incredible program of the Temple of Understandings, which we call Eco-Justice for All. This particular program is titled, Can Organic Farming Scale Up to Meet the UN's SDG Goals of Eradicating Poverty and Hunger? This series is an ongoing program of the Temple of Understanding. We are a 64-year-old interfaith organization whose mission is to advocate for interfaith values in the secular setting of the United Nations and as an NGO around the world. Our focus for the past 12, 13 years has been to increase the awareness of religious leaders and actors of our climate crisis and its negative impact on achieving the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. And in particular, we work on peace, justice, women's health and safety, food sovereignty, and ensuring a healthy planet for all. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce my colleague, Grove Harris, who is going to introduce our speakers for today. Thank you.
Good morning. Yes, I'm Grove Harris, and I'm the Director of Global Advocacy for the Temple of Understanding, and I am thrilled to be able to introduce this fantastic panel for an engaging session with them. Our first speaker is going to be Anastasia Nezvetalova. She is the head of UNCTAD's Macroeconomic and Development Policies branch. Her main research focuses on the political economy of finance. She has many publications to her credit, and her most recent research for UNCTAD has found that as many businesses and households struggle with soaring food costs, the largest food trading companies are making abnormal profits. Fragmented rules for the food trading industry have played a key role in enabling speculation and profiteering, and this volatility threatens food security. Anastasia, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Grove. Lovely to see you all. Could you please confirm whether you can hear me? Oh, wonderful. Okay. And I can now share my screen as I understand. Is that correct? I can share my screen. You will get this presentation. I was just delivering it to Brussels to some European Commission civil society organizations that are fighting monopoly power. So please forgive me if the title is not dedicated to you, but it's, I want to do a slideshow, sorry, from the beginning. Yes, it works, wonderful. As Grove indeed introduced, it is my research interest in financial system that led us to focus on this angle of the global food system, and in particular on something called food commodity traders that are controlling, literally, in a variety of ways, global food supplies, global food shipment, global food growing, global food property rights, global food complex interconnections, and most importantly, the finance mechanisms that enable investment, reinvestment in food production. So we published this research in something called Trade and Development Report. It's an annual publication of the United Nations on the global economy. And it was a very specific interest enticed by the consequences of COVID, but also the war in Ukraine, on price volatility in key markets and parallel profits. So if you can see on this picture, it's semi-scientific, I did it myself, representation of just how parallel or how similar profit levels have been in the energy sector and in the food trading sector after 2020. And you can see the huge increases in profitability of selected companies. They are quite unprecedented historically. They're also quite diverse because the sector is diverse and it reflects the number of companies that dominate the food system. But really, it's quite staggering to see that profit levels and profit margins are very high.
Excuse me for just a moment, Anastasia. What I'm seeing is something that is blocking the view of your slide, which I believe is on your screen.
It is indeed. It's in fact on one of my screens, and it's incredibly annoying that my
You've got the option to turn it on. Let's hope there's an option to turn it off.
you know what, you'll have to, do you see
Yes, now I've got it full screen and it's very clear now to you.
it's very clear. Okay, wonderful.
Thank
So
you.
it's
Appreciate it.
let's go without slide share. So as I said, I just selected the subsidiaries of these corporations that are major earners during these 5 years. And you can see the evolution of profit records for energy sector and for food. The paradox politically and socially is that while energy trading companies did get their share of public attention and dare I say taxation attention in 2022 and in 2021, food trading companies remain completely under the radar. Please let me know that you can see something on your screens.
Yes.
Okay. So the monopolies that control global food supplies are commonly called ABCD companies. The ABCD stand for the first letters of the 4 monopolies that control the market, and their names are spelled out under the left-hand side graph on your screen now. So this is Archer Daniels Midland, Bunge, Cargill, and Louis Dreyfus Company. Only 2 of them are publicly listed corporations. The 2 other are private. They have no obligation to tell us anything. They are under no obligation to disclose any financial accounting information, especially in their subsidiaries. And if they do report something in their annual report, we have to take it for granted what they write there. There is no verifiable way to check that the information is independently accountable and true. Let me see, sorry, my computer is playing up. So what we discovered is that, of course, you can see historically the blue line suggests that the profits levels for these 4 companies are unprecedentedly high since 2020. They've been going up since 2019, reflecting not only a particular cycle in commodity prices in global markets. All commodities are now more expensive than they were, for example, in 2015. But food commodities are particularly expensive, and of course it hurts developing countries most, those who import more food than the others, and those whose households rely on food imports disproportionately. So as Grove already introduced the topic, or was it Alison, it is absolutely correct to say that one estimation for 2030 suggests that more than 600 million people will be malnourished by 2030 because food security and food system crisis is not being resolved. On the right-hand side of this graph, you see a technical representation of the profit structure of the sector. Not just the 4 companies, there are 13 companies on the graph. And you can see that the red line, which we take to be profits from financial operations, we dissect which type of profits they make. I'm happy to answer questions should you have them at the end. But it's the financial profits that have been particularly high in the past 2 years of volatility. So operating revenues are what these companies get for their normal business operations. So for trading grain, or for trading wheat, or for trading sunflower oil. But should you have a financial operation, or should you be investing in real estate, or should you be investing in financial securities to speculate, all those profits go into this red line. They're reflected in the red line. And you can see just how high and how much higher this line is against other indicators of profitability and revenues. It suggests many things. It suggests the divorce or the gulf between so-called real economic engagement and their financial activity in financial markets. But it also points to the idea that, again, nobody is looking seriously at an important profit-making aspect of this sector from a regulatory perspective. They're doing it handsomely, they're doing it profitably, but they're not being regulated or monitored for financial activities. They're active participants in financial markets. They trade financial derivatives. Some of them traded amply and almost professionally. This contributes to part of speculation in finance. In turn, it contributes to price inflation in final markets. But it goes on without proper regulatory oversight. This is a story. I think you should pay attention to the text on the left-hand side of the slide. But what I can explain about the graphs here, this is a representation of the structure of financial speculation in commodity derivatives, including food derivatives, agricultural derivatives. And you can see a whole history of speculation and regulation in these two lines. The data comes from the Bank for International Settlements, the only institution that has an agglomeration of such data globally. And most importantly, it reflects so-called over-the-counter markets. That means these are private markets. They're not regulated exchanges. These are private deals created between two parties in an unregulated, not overseen, unmonitored, but complex way. The blue line here the orange line on this graph reflects how many bets were taken overall in the market. Those bets could be for price decrease or for price increase, it doesn't matter. The blue line indicates to you just how many of those deals or bets were successful. And you can see two little peaks. One is around 2009, which we know was one big commodity price peak after the financial crisis, and one is now. If you can look visually how the two lines relate to one another, you can see that there is very tight connection between the overall bets being placed in the financial market and the amount of bets that were successful. That suggests that there was fresh liquidity, fresh financial interest coming into this market for commodities at around that time. In fact, that interest was professional. From the literature and reports, we know that this was exactly the time when banks and financial institutions decided to have appetite for commodities. They decided to trade them professionally and on a ground scale. Banks would end up with oil tankers in the sea. They were actually delivering oil to some customers. Not all of them did it successfully, but this was the time when financial institutions came into the commodity market with great gusto. And they were professional because they were successful and they know how to do it. You can see just how successful, how close the peaks are. But then regulations followed. The banking system became to be regulated after 2011, 2012. We have Basel Accords, we have MiFID in Europe. There are other regulations for systemic banks at national level. And one of the consequences that banks were invited or decided to leave such area of the engagement. In fact, there were some pressure from interest groups, from commodity traders to say that, of course, it's the banks who are doing the speculation. Please leave us alone. We are professional. We are industrial corporation trading food. We do not speculate. Please leave us. Please give us a lot of exceptions to your new financial regulation because we need access to financial markets on a regular basis to insure ourselves. So a lot of the regulations that were initially proposed by American legislations, in particular by Dodd-Frank Act and related documents, they were diluted to accommodate the very exceptionality of commodity traders and food traders in particular. Most of the exceptions, in fact, concern food items such as soy, wheat, and I forgot there is a third commodity. So the market was more or less stable until 2020, and until prices started to go up again globally. And we see that the interest to speculate is still remained. In fact, it was reignited, but it was now much less successful. There was less liquidity into the market generally, and the success of these bets was much less professional. This suggests to me that these are the incumbent inhabitants of the financial market for food security that are doing the speculation, and they are doing it with diverse success. Some are very successful and some are less successful. So that's why you see the two peaks, and the two lines portray very different sociology of speculation, but a very important story of regulation that left a hugely important area of the global economy completely unmonitored, unregulated, and dare I say, untaxed. Next slide. Should you want to do something about the big four companies, or all the companies that control the global food supply, you are faced with a difficulty, because these are not only complex geographical organizations of supply chains and value chains, but these are legal organisms that exist in multiple spaces, in multiple jurisdictions at the same time. So when we say ABCD companies, in reality, we know that each one of them might consist of up to 900 or 800 subsidiaries, and each of these subsidiaries is a separate company located in a separate state. And that separate state would have separate regulations and governance procedures and compliance norms and transparency norms and taxation norms for this particular subsidiary. In fact, that's why they're there. It's completely asymmetric in terms of corporate power and public power, or the power of the state, the power of civil society, partly because of this complexity, partly because it's still a very concentrated and opaque sector, because, as I said, there is no global regulator looking at them closely at a full scope of their operations. It also raises questions of economic justice, because, for example, if a country or a state should want to stock up food for a rainy day or for a crisis period, preparing for a crisis that is sure to come, that state will have to comply with a variety of very expensive regulatory procedures according to WTO rules, for example. It will be actually very expensive for the state not only to store the actual food stock, but to do the regulatory compliance, to be transparent and to report everything that you have. On the other hand, the companies don't have such obligations at all. They have superior knowledge and access to information. They control the physical and financial markets that comprise the global food system, but they're unregulated. They're under no obligation to disclose the stocks or they have the prospective developments that will affect their asset markets. And of course, they have all the facilities to benefit from that superior knowledge. So I won't bore you with this technicality, but this graph shows that we have pierced their corporate veil as a sector and as individual corporations to see what they're doing at the level of their subsidiaries. So what is the contrast between what we see as the global ultimate owner, as a global parent corporation, vis-a-vis what this parent corporation has inside? And we discovered that all the big ones, so these are the red arrows on your slide, during the years of volatility have become over-financialized at the level of their subsidiaries. So they have developed their financial investments and operations with financial instruments at a disproportionate level to what they report at a parent level. That means that they are now an active part of the shadow banking system that remains an unresolved problem from 2008. And some commentators and analysts are suggesting that it is from that area, from the shadow banking system, that new risks of financial crisis can materialize within a foreseeable future, because nobody is looking at this or similar operations in other sectors. In fact, one scenario is particularly worrying. Let's say they are now sitting on a variety on a pile of cash. In fact, we do have the data. I will show it to you in a second. But what if one of them becomes particularly illiquid or indebted, or faces a financial trouble, and comes to another one to buy it? So a hugely concentrated, systemically important global sector will become even more monopolized, because one monopoly will have to absorb another monopoly or part of it. It does nothing for competition. It does very little for transparency. and it creates its own sets of risks of financial security, prices, and development of stable food systems that I understand your audience is very concerned. Our insights were just confirmed by a private report of commodity industry published by somebody called Oliver Wyman. It's a consultancy, it's an institution, who says that for last year, the financial gains for the sector are the second highest in the recently observed period. So they're now sitting on more than $100 billion in extra cash. They can, of course, theoretically use it for productive investment, for reinvestment to improve technology, or they can use it to buy each other, for example. Or maybe they are also sitting, well, some of them are sitting on piles of surplus cash, some of them also conceal debts. And that creates a financial crisis or an illiquidity risk at least. It also suggests that the early proposals of looking at these monopolies who control the global food system in terms of trading and ownership, maybe it's time to look at them as financial institutions, and maybe it's time for financial regulators to extend systemic regulations to this sector. It wasn't done in 2012. At that time, it was resolved that there isn't enough evidence to suggest that these are financial institutions, in fact. Now the evidence is gathering practically every, if not every week, but definitely every month. And it should be on the radar of a lot of interested parties, including civil society, to make it an important socio-political issue of economic justice and economic stability. With this, I finish. I'm sorry if I was too technical, but I will be happy to answer questions should you have any. You can download the full chapter if you follow this link on the slide, or you can ask me or Grove for the link. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anastasia. One of the key pieces I'm getting from what you're saying is that our desire to solve some of the SDGs actually depends on all of them, because you're speaking to the incredible increase in inequalities, which is just such an important piece of our picture. And I wanted to also thank you and UNCTAD for the way that you have got videos online presenting your work in different pieces and with very succinct summaries to take technical data and make it really accessible. So I really appreciate your work as a partnering for the common good. So really, thank you so much for that. And I would welcome questions if other panelists had specific questions. And I guess the one that I'd like to ask you to think with us a little bit more about, Anastasia, is how these commodities relate to actual food. Because it seems to me that we're talking about huge shipments of industrialized products, whereas when we shift into thinking about organics, we're talking about tomatoes and we're talking about food. And can you just describe a little more the industrial nature of this profiteering that we're seeing?
It's a very good question, Grove. I think it's important to emphasize that the nature of profiteering is in fact not industrial. It's the nature of regulatory arbitrage is the supposedly industrial or manufacturing label that the sector has been advocating. But our research, but also other evidence coming from other corners, points that these are now, the nature of profiteering is financial. It is through financialized channels, through control of ownership, through control of assets, through access to derivative markets, that profiteering, expansion, complexity, and risks are spread. So you're right, the tomatoes at a very micro level in organic farms or small communities that are engaged with farming have really literally no place in financial chains or financial markets for assets. Basically, if you talk about global agriculture, you talk about assets. There is a saying in one of the specialized reports by top scholars who have been working on it for decades, that you can drink your coffee before it has been sold in the financial market. So the shipment is now so divorced from the financial operation with the underlying asset that we can literally be drinking coffee that hadn't been sold as yet as a financial product because, for example, a time for that future derivative on this coffee bean hasn't come, or maybe because it was done in a different way or in a different modality of contract. So it just shows the gap between global macro scale of corporately controlled agriculture, and it's a David and Goliath story, really, and tomatoes that we would like to see in greenhouses or in gardens that would be clean and tasty.
Wow, it seems really clear that local sustainable food production is going to be a key part of actually
Correct.
feeding our world. Paul,
Correct.
I'd love to welcome you in if you've got a question.
Yes, I did. I just wanted to hear where you think it's most likely that regulation of that kind of commodity speculation could come from, or regulation that favorizes more food sovereignty.
Thank you. It's a fantastic question. In the chapter, we already suggest that the first important step is in fact already written. It's in printed text in Dodd-Frank regulations. It's just that it wasn't applied fully or was deliberately diluted. So this is the first and important step forward. But then, of course, it takes, this puts enormous responsibility and role for US regulations. But it needs to be matched by the Financial Stability Board that does monitor some commodity markets, but not in a systemic way as yet. And I think other multilateral regulatory forums where policymakers meet should be looking at it definitely more systemically, because when you discuss systemic regulations, I think one message I would like to, whoever is listening, to get is that you cannot now regulate anything if you do not regulate the financial dimension of that thing.
Okay.
That would, if you're regulating car production without regulating the financial credits that are given to as car loans, or the presence of car companies in the financial market, that means you're not really regulating it. That in fact you're giving them a leeway to become a bank, for example. I'm sorry, this is pessimistic.
It's so important and challenging to hear. I remember in the open working group process leading into the SDGs, there was talk then and beyond about ring fencing essential services. Yep. And that one of our key problems is if we invite private interests who have a profit motive to take care of the things that we need to survive, then we've got a problem. And so I'm hearing you say that financialization is a level of abstraction from that. But in a way, maybe the concept is there as well, that we, the people, need to have access to food. And in terms of supply chains and those shocks and the prices going up, is there any chance that these difficulties will actually, is there a way that we can, David and Goliath, leverage this to build local resiliencies and to call for that, and even to get development banks to invest in local resiliency in farming? Do you have a thought on that as a strategy?
I think then very quickly, because I hear there are questions and answers. People want to hear other speakers, so I won't be very brief. It can only be done as a strategic policy by the state. So there should be incentives if you want ring fencing, particular conditions on development financing for particular type or sections of food production agriculture. In fact, digital control and control of copyright and technology is key to them, because you cannot give a land without controlling processes that go into the land. So if processes are controlled by private corporations, but you're giving the land to local farming community, you already create a disbalance. You need to understand things systemically.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And Lindley, I see you've got a question. Would you like me to introduce you first? as the next speaker, or would you like to go for your question first?
Up to you, Grove. I just have a quick question, so maybe I'll
Jump.
let Anastasia answer here. So I'm also part of a movement that worked on political reform for rules that just simply weren't being enforced, and that was failed. So essentially, what we were told by people who have done this for a long time is that you actually can't get successful political reform until you have a grassroots movement demanding that reform, so a much larger movement. So I'm curious, that's what we've tried to create in order to get just the enforcement of laws that are already on the books. If you have ideas for this, is
Yeah,
very
that's correct. Often I answer such questions with a fantastic tale, but it's a true tale. Recently, I think it was in November, UN General Assembly has voted for a UN framework on international taxation. It was a massive political success for the global South and an indication of how important, how socially important taxation is internationally. So it came to the level of a UN General Assembly, probably the highest political forum in the world, most inclusive, led by the African group. The issue of international taxation or tax justice became as a grassroots movement in one garden in Britain. It was moved by 3 or 4 men, financed by their wives who had full-time jobs, and they were literally sitting in the shed. And for about 10 years, there were a movement. People were maybe interested in what they had to say about tax justice, but it wasn't really a great political program. Nobody saw the importance of that taxation because you were supposed to invest, compete, develop your financial sector. Taxation was maybe at most something about rich individuals. And then the 2007 crisis happened. And public austerity became the cost of resolution of that crisis. And suddenly, tax justice became a huge political issue nationally, in democracies, and also internationally. So it took, more than 20 years for that movement from an English garden to the UN General Assembly. But it's a success of how grassroots, but competent and grassroots with a mission, can actually move things literally to the highest level of decision making. We're yet to see what happens with the resolution, but it's one example. I don't know if I'm giving you an optimistic scenario, but I think it's that's the parallel that comes to mind, and it's a good parallel.
Thank you so much, Anastasia.
My pleasure.
Appreciate you joining us.
My pleasure. Can I leave now?
Yes.
Thank you. I need to run. Thanks. Bye.
Lindley, I'd like to introduce you next. Lindley Dixon, PhD, co-director of the Real Organic Project. She farms organic vegetables in Southwest Colorado, holds a PhD in plant pathology, and she is the co-director with Vermont organic farmer Dave Chapman of Real Organic Project, which is a farmer-led add-on organic certification that certifies farms as just as the organic movement intended. That means that they foster healthy soils, pasture livestock, ensure protections for workers, and are committed to whole farm organic principles. They also provide the transparency that is often lacking in the huge financial marketplaces that we've just heard about. Lindley, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Grove, for having me. I wanted to start with sort of rephrasing the question that we're all asking today, which is how to scale organic. And the Real Organic Project is this wonderful movement that where I've learned so much from so many people who have become a part of it. And one of the things that I learned is that you actually don't want to scale organic, you want to replicate organic. So just as you were saying before, we want lots and lots of small organic farms. And I think if we start phrasing the question, how do we replicate organic instead of scale it? We're not actually talking about massive organic farms. We're just talking about thousands and thousands of more organic farms. So I'm a first generation farmer and feel a part of a movement that's maybe old, that back to land movement, but it's almost like it's in us, that there's some people that just want to tend to the land. And that was definitely part of my calling to farm. So even though I have a PhD and spent a long time in academia, I always knew that I would give it a go. And there's a whole generation of people that are trying to make farming a living because it's right livelihood, and that is hard to find these days. So my husband and brother now run the farm full time, and we know the struggles that it takes for first generation farmer to succeed, finding land, finding access to markets, gaining skills, the infrastructure, so financing the infrastructure that you need to farm. So all of these are struggles. And we interviewed last night in a book club an author, first-time author who wrote a book called Barons. His name's Austin Frerick. And he said, you know, you market farmers are really the only farmers that are operating in a free economy right now because you're not subsidized and, you know, not under the consolidation, the monopolistic things that kind of break markets, free markets, those monopolistic tendencies. Um, and so he said, you know, we really have to figure out a way, instead of subsidizing the concentration in the food system, to subsidizing the small farms until you all get, you know, a leg under, and really, you know, the number of young farmers that try this and then fail, not because they're not working hard or don't obtain the skills and work hard on markets, but it's really because the system is just stacked against them. So we need to switch that for a while until we can operate, you know, without subsidies. But right now, the system is just so stacked against us. I've heard so many farmers say, if we could just pull the plug on the USDA right now, that's how, and just compete under a free market, we would win, you know, because people want the food that we're growing right now. So our farm specializes in tomatoes. And I just want to give this short, inspiring story because I know that this small farm revolution is possible. I know we're less than 1% of the food that is, you know, sold and eaten right now. We're essentially non-existent on grocery stores because of the concentration in that industry. So our farm can only sell to locally owned grocery stores and co-ops right now. There is no way that we could. I've tried to like get into the system of a natural grocers or a Kroger or City Market right now. They have to, you know, work through regional and in some cases global suppliers in order to get anything on the shelf. So they're looking for someone who can produce something year round consistently, which means not really a farmer. It's somebody who, you know, owns farmland in lots of different places, or brokers from farmers, you know, from different places. And then, you know, it has to go through a middleman. But this is just a really inspiring story, I think. So our farm personally has displaced $80,000 worth of organic tomatoes that are hydroponic. You know, the law requires soil stewardship under organic. So this is a lack of enforcement. It really is illegal certification of tasteless hydroponic tomatoes that customers don't even want. It's not labeled. They don't know why tomatoes taste horrible all of a sudden. So that is working with just our local co-op. We have, you know, three grocery stores that we're able to get our tomatoes on the shelves. $80,000 worth. Doesn't seem like a lot. But just say in our community, we were to replicate our farm, and there would be 100 of our small farms that are now displacing the Krogers and the Walmarts and the Albertsons, City Markets, all of those bigger chains. That's $8 million worth of tomatoes, right? You get 1,000 farms in Colorado, maybe it's $80 million. 10,000 small farms is really not that many farms if you think about our small community having 100, right? And then that's $1 billion displacement of this highly concentrated fake organic that is now the only choice that most people have where they shop. So the key is to get our food on the shelves somehow. And the only way to do that, I believe, is to differentiate our product so that it's not the exact same as what is getting certified as USDA organic, because really the lowest bar is what becomes the only thing that you can buy. And because it's cheaper to produce tomatoes hydroponically, especially out of the country where, you know, they're paying workers, you know, what we pay our workers in an hour, they're paying them in a day. There's really no way for us to compete. So we really need to differentiate ourselves. So that's what the Real Organic Project is all about, It's a farmer-led movement. The sign behind me is what the label looks like. We started out working for political reform and essentially just asking the USDA to enforce the organic standards. And it wasn't just the influx of hydroponics. There's CAFO certification in organics. So we actually have anything in poultry really now, eggs and meat. Those animals do not see the light of day. The same thing is coming true for dairy, that they really aren't grazing the cattle. That enforcement is not there, even though the law is not there. So when we failed, that political reform failed, we actually started our own real organic standards board. 15 members mimicked the USDA and said, you know what, we're here. As soon as you decide that you actually want to enforce your own laws, because that's what we're doing, is actually just enforcing the rules, then, we'll be here. So because our farms were disappearing because of that, whatever that minimum bar is becomes the market. So the whole goal is to just connect the farmers to the eaters that really want our food. We actually have the exact same pricing right now. I mean, I don't know if you've seen your grocery stores the food is very expensive right now, and that is because of the concentration in the industry. So as these monopolies form, they are actually able to drop the price a little bit initially, outcompete everyone, and then once those local co-ops go out of business, boom, the price of their product goes up. And that's what we're seeing now. So it's very expensive to go grocery shopping. And for the first time, our local food is the same price, if not cheaper sometimes, than what's coming in off the trucks. But we're still not on the shelves, right? So the Real Organic Project is an attempt to differentiate our product under the USDA and actually create some shelf space for the farms that are actually just meeting the current standards. I'm opening up the kind of conversation to take any questions.
Lily, I have a question, and this is something that, I'm going to show you how little I know about farming, even though it's been about 25 years since I actually was a dairy farmer in Vermont. But I'm curious about something that I keep hearing about that has to do with plants in Africa that are considered marginal. They're not the soy, corn, wheat product that everybody is being forced to grow. And there are people that are saying that we could have scientists take a look at these particular vegetables and perhaps improve them. So I'm wondering, do you think are they talking about, doing some sort of a god awful GMO attack on these poor plants and then trying to market them? Or do you think that there's a possibility of improving the biodiversity of what we eat with organic farming?
Oh gosh, so I'm very skeptical of any scientist that is trying to. So they're trying to take the tasteless strawberries now that have extremely long shelf life. So you can pick them and they'll last for a month, right? And they're spongy, but so they're bred for shelf life. And now they're trying to insert a gene to make them taste good, a gene, right? So the complexity of the reason why our tomatoes taste so good is they're hybrids. We have some technologies that we can use to make a tomato more disease resistant or more higher yields, but they're not GMOs. So that simplistic reductive technology of we can bring in a single gene and it'll solve all our problems. That is a very as a plant pathologist, I have a ton of stories of how a single gene ends up becoming susceptible. That gene that we actually bred for a specific trait actually becomes a susceptibility gene because you have eroded so much genetic diversity in that process of trying to even if it's traditional breeding. But if you don't have that genetic diversity that's from saving seed over time in the land races that have been developed by farmers, you are going to be susceptible. So there's no even if it's not a GMO, which definitely that is very reductionist, but there's no one seed or anything that's going to save us. So that whole idea of what the promises of the green revolution, it really represented a loss of all of that local knowledge, the local plants, displacement of farmers off the land, concentration of power, right? Concentration of machinery, like highly irrigated land, very expensive land. That's where food ended up being, the green revolution ended up working. And those seeds only work when there's irrigation and fertilizers. Those traditional varieties are actually bred to produce on the, drier marginal lands that don't have irrigation. So I would be very skeptical. I'm not exactly sure specifically what you're talking about, but I've spent time in Africa. I actually was an extension agent on Guam, and the foods that people are eating that are part of their culture are locally adapted. They're resilient to diseases because that genetic diversity is there. And they're good for production across the regions by small farmers instead of needing all those inputs that some of these new seeds need. So I believe those technologies are completely tied to concentrations of power for someone to earn a lot of money. So I would not fall for any of it. Anybody who's saying we're going to breed you a better X. It's not the case. The local farmers have that as part of their culture. They already have the seed. If they haven't lost it, it exists somewhere. If we act quickly, and that's what we need to be replicating.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And Lindley, do you think that we actually need to get closer to the land and to our local farmers and to stop demanding strawberries year round?
Oh, absolutely. So we have a real organic blueberry farmer right now in Florida. And unfortunately, blueberries just don't grow in Colorado because we have very high pH soils. So he was used to sell to Whole Foods, and with the influx of cheaper hydroponic from out of the country, kicked off the shelves. He now direct markets. So I am able to, unfortunately, because I can't ever get a local blueberry purchase from him, and I just freeze it. So everybody find the best products that you can find either locally or if it has to be outside your region from a good farmer. And there's ways to preserve this food when it's not in season. So freeze or can. I really believe in that. And the food tastes so much better. It's crazy how spoiled you get. You just don't, I just don't want to eat that food anymore. And your body can tell the difference too. So it's a wonderful thing. And if you buy in bulk, it's actually can be more affordable to do it in season in bulk. Get a freezer.
Those blueberries are arriving on my doorstep today. And I can tell you right now, they are unbelievably, fantastically great.
They
So
are much
I
cheaper
recommend it.
in Florida. Unfortunately, when you get them shipped, they're not as affordable. But
Yeah.
For me, because I can't get them locally in the summertime, it's worth it.
It's worth it.
Food and investment in our bodies, our health, our future. I'd like to move on now and ask Paul to do his presentation, and then we will have more time for discussion amongst both of you. And hopefully that we will also have Dr. Miguel Altieri. He's traveling, and I hope that he'll be able to join us. But Paul, you are a world board member of the International Federation of Organic Agriculture Movements, IFOAM, Organics International. You have led Organic Denmark as a director and played a leading role for over 25 years in developing Denmark's ambitious organic goals and policies, and a strong organic organization of farmers, consumers, and food companies as a driving force for change. And you currently advise leaders in government, business, and organizations on national strategies for organics and agroecology, currently co-developing plans in the Netherlands, Tanzania, Canada, and Uganda. Please, we welcome you to this conversation to share your expertise.
Great, thanks a lot. I have a funny thing with my phone here. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, just a reflection on the first couple of presentations. I think it kind of answered pretty well the first question that we actually got, which was, you know, what do we need to do to overcome what do we need to overcome in order to promote healthy food systems, both locally and internationally? Because it was this combination of what we need to tame in the current food system, the wide use of fertilizers and pesticides and antibiotics and wide speculation with commodities. And then at the same time, we need to build the alternative that consumers, farmers, workers can step over on as the future food system. And that requires a lot of things, a lot of policy, strong movements, and it requires a lot of things need to change in the market. Markets need to be built, like Lindley was also describing their efforts. I think I'd like to show a hopeful picture of what is happening with organics. I want to just share a few slides just to give you a sense of what's happening and what's driving change. So if I'm allowed to share my screen, I'm going to go ahead and do that. How's that look? Great. Sorry, I have an echo here that's sort of getting me. One of the things that's happened in the last few years is this recent breakthrough in recognition for organic farming and agroecology. We've been beaten over the head for years that organics can't feed the world, that organics is a problem for climate because yields are lower per hectare, etc. We've all heard it, but science has spoken. So the IPCC, the UNEP, the FAO, World Food Security Committee, you name it, science, when you look at all the research, has concluded that actually organics and agroecology is a key part of the solution for food security, for biodiversity, for better farm incomes and rural communities, reducing pesticide pollution, and a whole range of other issues. And that culminated in 2021 with the formation of the Agroecology Coalition. 50 countries have joined now, and over 130 international organizations, including iPhone as one of them, to build agroecology and organic farming as the alternative to the current degenerative food systems. And fortunately, organics is growing. These are fresh figures. We have 4.5 million organic farmers worldwide. We have literally hundreds of millions of farmers who are practicing agroecological practices and are a huge part of the change happening on the planet. So we have more organic farmland, more organic farmers, increased organic sales. The global food market is getting close to $150 billion per year. Increasing our impact, better livelihoods for many more farmers. So that's the good news. There's a lot of growth. In the European Union, we've moved organics in as a central pillar now of European Union policy for climate, for biodiversity, for water quality and rural livelihoods. The current goal in the European Union is that 25% of organic farm area should be organic in 2030. And there's a new EU Organic Action Plan to drive that forward. I think, if I remember right, the organic percentages in the United States is maybe 1%. It's currently in the European Union about 8.9%. All 27 nations in the European Union have now set organic goals, and many have developed new policy frameworks, and many still need to. And then they're integrating organics as a tool in these broader policies for agriculture and climate. This is kind of the strangely, wildly different picture in the different countries. Goals vary from 5% to 35% organic. in the European Union. Germany just came with a new strategy for 30% organic in 2030. And interestingly, they call organics the driver and model for transition in all of agriculture. And they put a lot of emphasis on that the new ideas, the new innovations in organic farming is what is the inspiration and the creator of the future of agriculture. The Netherlands just developed a new strategy for 15% organic. It's a very strong action plan. Bhutan, this is a new strategy I helped with in Tanzania. It was launched in November. We have major launching of implementation measures in the next 2 months. And so this use of action plans is really key. Denmark was the first country to develop them, and we've done a number of them since. And I would say no nation has really developed a really thriving organic food farming sector without some kind of national policy framework. The United States has some pieces of this. There's a little marketing support. There's some farm extension. There's some research, but there's no full policy framework. At the global level, we're trying to support this, help individual countries develop national plans. And then we have a lot of focus in our new strategy on strengthening frontline actors, organizations, and their advocacy and their work to develop markets. And then we're trying to grow organic markets, and not just certified organic, those 4.5 million farmers, but also our what we call participatory guarantee systems, which are not third-party certified, but it's peer certification, which is working very well in 77 countries now and reaching millions more smallholder farmers. We've also developed grower groups as an important strategy for smallholders to have access to global markets where they get a better price for some of their products. And small, by the way, is kind of a relative thing. The small farmers I think Lindley's talking about would be huge farmers in Tanzania. And then continuously improving organic. We haven't solved all the problems in climate, nature, or fairness, so still need to develop. And then safeguarding organic integrity against fraud, particularly in international trade. And I just want to mention that the 3 countries with the highest market levels, Denmark, or 3 out of the 4, Denmark, Austria, and Switzerland, these are what I call sector-driven growth. So it means the movement is strong enough, it's built a capacity to actually do market development, to work with retailers, to work with wholesalers, and they're supported by national policy. And in Denmark, this has brought us to very high market levels. I mean, we have 44% of the market for milk, carrots, almost 60%, bananas, 80%. Conventional bananas are being phased out in all retail supermarkets because they're just not selling enough of them. Some of the products we're supposed to eat less of, more animal-based products, we have lower market shares, but it's still the world's highest. So it's not a niche anymore. We can be the largest part, the norm in the market. And for these folks who I've been working for decades, there's also a lot of positive momentum. In organic, in Denmark, we've doubled the organic area in 2007 to 20 and have a new goal of doubling again. A large percentage of production is now also organic, 25% of all eggs, 30% of all vegetables. Organic farmers are earning more. There's a big interest from young farmers, and organics is recognized for innovation. This quote here, this is from the organization representing all of farmers and all of food companies in Denmark, saying it's the strongest sustainability and value-added concept that we have. And none of this happens on its own. There's these 3 key drivers that are needed in all countries: policy, market initiatives, and a stronger movement. And then a lot of collaboration, coordination. And this one, the strength of the movement itself, the capacity to drive change in fields and in markets, is the most often missing link in different countries. Organics is also being built into climate policy. The Danish climate strategy from 2021, that's actually where the decision was to double the organic area. We made the largest national investment in the world in plant-based foods. 50% of this targeted to organic plant-based because it matters how those plants and plant-based are grown. There's a lot of conventional plant-based products out there. And then investments in climate innovation and plant-based food product development. And then organics is also central in our public procurement. So like all our school food for schools and public employees, hospitals, old folks. And I just want to mention, I do a lot of my work is in Africa, and this is kind of what seems to be needed from different countries, what stakeholders themselves are pointing to. So it's working in policy that hits the whole value chain from the natural capital to farmers to the markets, and then cross-cutting needs around financing, capacity building for the organic organizations, and then gender and indigenous peoples and social inclusion, and then a strong smallholder focus. This is kind of cross-cutting the whole issue. I'm just going to skip over a couple of things here. I just want to mention one last example is our work with public procurement in Denmark, where we've moved not just to more organic food, where Copenhagen's at 90% organic today, but to less meat, more greens, more food and seeds, and reduce waste, creating a more holistic approach, healthy, organic, climate-friendly meals within the same budget because we save money on less waste and less meat. So money's going to farmers for a higher price for their products rather than going into the waste bin or going into an exaggerated use of meat. And our model has been copied now in a number of countries. You can see it, policy actually makes a difference. The French have copied our model for public procurement, Germany last year. So these good best practices, we need to spread them across countries, and it's actually starting to happen. Thanks. My last message, support organics. Thanks.
Paul, thank you so much. Wonderful. I think we've got some questions for you, so that won't be your last message. My goodness. And Lindley, I'm sure you've got questions as well. Part of the main one is how do we get these successful development that you've got going in Europe to be happening more in the US? But do you mind if I start? And also I want to say to people in our audience, please feel free. The Q&A is open to you. We'd welcome questions from the audience. If you've got things that you'd like either of these two speakers to speak more on, please feel free to chime in with your questions. It's related, but I find myself wanting to ask you both about plastics. I know that in the normal food delivery chains now, every product is wrapped in plastic and it's shipped on a pallet that is also wrapped in plastic. And it's just all about plastic. And I have a funny feeling that both of you have thought about other ways to deliver to varying markets in a much more, can we say, organic fashion. So could both of you take a moment and speak to that?
Should I start? Yeah, I mean, it's a huge issue. I think one thing that is important to point out at the start, while we do need to reduce the use of plastic in farming, in distribution, and then recycling of what plastic is used. When you look at like climate impacts from food, packaging means almost nothing. It's like for many products, I mean, particularly if you're looking at animal products, we're talking less than 1%. So there's actually greenwashing has been going on where, dairies put, we've reduced our impact of our packaging by 90%. And wow, that adds up to like less than 1% of the climate impact of their product. So that's kind of just to put some perspective on it. But yeah, there's a lot of focus on reducing the use of plastics in the fields, reducing use of plastics in the stores. One big issue is plastics are often used to keep and identify organic products separately from conventional products. So if you have apples and apples, the organic ones are packaged, which is awful, and then the other ones are open, but just to keep them separate. And fortunately, some of those products is starting to tip over in the other direction now, in Denmark, where you can set the organic produce free and start packaging the fewer conventional products. But yeah, we need more solutions there for sure.
Much like Paul said, I would be really wary of the messaging that comes from some of these big industries. So the hydroponic industry is really good at saying, well, we reduce water. Meanwhile, they're growing in the desert and they're trying to feed the world from the desert. So they're definitely draining aquifers with their reduced water use in these hydroponic systems. But aside from that, they're not looking at the water use or the plastic use that's coming from all of the inputs that they're putting into their system. So there's an organic rule in place right now in the standards that says you can't have plastic ground cover that stays between seasons. So their hydroponic facilities, they laser level the land, they put this plastic ground cover down, they place plastic pots. Lately, they've been placing the pots on plastic stands because they use herbicides, and the stands, the USDA allows them to get the pots 6 inches off the ground so they can use herbicides right before they do all this on these organic farms. So we're not looking at the full impact, and they'll message something like reduced water use, and so just be very wary of claims, and you need to look deeper. So meanwhile, a soil grown blueberry lasts 20 years. The entire plastic farm, hydroponic farm, gets thrown out in 3 years, and then they start over again. So this is like an environmental nightmare. And so, but they hide all that, right? If you go to their websites, they'll say, we don't produce hydroponically, we produce in containers. And they'll only show pictures of like the plants from like the waist up, so you just see the beautiful blueberries. You don't see all the plastic. Often the plastic's overhead too. So they're not even, if it rains, you wouldn't accumulate that water on the plants either. It's very twisted. Be very wary of any environmental messaging right now. It's all so greenwashed.
Paul, I just want to ask you a question. What would you say to a gentleman who lives in Kenya? His name is Wanjama, and his problem is basically that he's trying to work on putting together organic farmers so that they can work together. But what he's coming up with is that his government is embedded in this whole GMO process, all of the toxic fertilizers and everything that you're talking about. And they have a rule that basically he's not allowed to give a seed to his grandmother, or his grandmother can't give him a seed without going through the government process of having to buy these expensive seeds and expensive fertilizers and all of that. So what would you say to, someone in a situation like that in, let's say, an undeveloped country, or where these people have come in, they've sold what they have to sell to the government, and the government people don't know a thing about farming, and they say, oh great, okay, well, we'll make this the rule of the land, and that leaves the organic farmer with just total inability to function. So what would you say to that? Thanks.
Yeah, I'll try to address that, and also a couple of the other questions that were up in the question box there. Yeah, well, there's hope on the way in Kenya. There's a very strong new policy for ecological organic agriculture and agroecology on its way. It's in its final draft. There's been huge involvement by stakeholders, and one of the areas is protection of the rights to use indigenous seeds, which is a real issue. They've had, like as you said, a very restrictive policy there, which major companies got in because they didn't want competition from indigenous seed, which is unbelievable, that they would succeed with that, but that's the way it's been. But there's work going on there with seed banks now, and with as in Tanzania, where I'm also working, a lot of strong work on seed banks protecting local and indigenous seed, and also assisting with breeding. So yeah, there's hope on the way, and there are real pathways for organic farmers from Kenya. Kenya has many organic farmers. I can't remember how many tens of thousands, but many small producers are organized in grower groups, which are then certified together. It makes it much cheaper for smallholders to be certified. And that's part of an response to one of the questions here, which is about cost of certification, which can be quite high, particularly for small producers. So one model is the grower groups model. In Denmark, we've made certification free. The government pays for certification with the thought that farmers shouldn't have to pay more because they're producing and providing eco services to society. Lastly, there was also a question there about regenerative agriculture and the attacks from some actors in the regenerative agriculture movement on organic. I do see these also. I have very good cooperation with some serious actors within the regenerative movement who are very much practicing organic principles and agroecological principles. But we do have the other regenerative, which is where larger companies change a couple of practices, have some cover crops, and then say rebrand themselves as regenerative. It is a serious problem. The comparisons and the organic bashing from the regenerative movement, or some of it, is always inevitably based on a comparison between aspirations and principles in regenerative agriculture compared to minimum standards for organic certification. If you compare principles to principles, there are no regenerative principles that are not covered by the international IFOAM Organics International principles of organic agriculture. And that's why the term regenerative agriculture was coined by organic pioneers at Rodale to describe organic farming, the goals of organic farming. I hope I answered some of those questions. Oh, there was another question about how much organics is imported to Denmark. I don't have the figures in my head. I think it's about 20%. We do have a significant import, particularly of fruit from the global south, coffee, things like that.
Getting organic certification covered by the government would be a dream, because that's the main reason that a lot of small farms don't do it in the US, that they are organic growers. But we have to front the costs of certification for a small farm. They're about $1,500 to $2,000. If you have livestock, that doubles. If you have any processing on your farm, that triples. So, and then we do have a cost share program where a portion of that, only about half, is paid back, but you have to wait 6 months for that to kick in. And it's too big of a barrier in the spring when your income is already really low. So a lot of organic farmers just aren't getting covered by the certification program. I wanted to touch on your question about Africa, though. I did spend some time in Kenya and on Guam doing extension. I was astonished as to how much free pesticides are passed out by the government. The chemical companies are definitely looking to increase their market share in the global south. And so they are using things like invasive weeds, invasive pests to get the government to buy these pesticides and then hand them out without safety equipment, oftentimes very minimal training. So I'll see these chemicals, I'll see people spraying them. I have seen leaf miner as like the main pest, which is just insane. This was a cucumber farm. Leaf miner has thousands of natural enemies which go after it. So it's like a clear sign that like every natural beneficial insect has just been obliterated on this farm for a leaf miner to actually be the main pest. So insecticides end up inevitably creating worse pest problems because you don't have those natural balances. So it's a very like quick fix for a pest, and you just create all kinds of problems afterwards. But maybe Paul can attest to some of this, like handing out of free chemicals that I just witnessed. It was really disturbing to me. We have a podcast that we interviewed Hans Herren and his wife Barbara Hemmelherren or something like Gemmelherren. They have fabulous stories to tell about successes with biological control. So there's all kinds of alternatives to pesticides that we need to be exploring. Maybe you can attest to why our government is so embedded with the chemical industry and what to do about that, Paul.
Yeah, briefly, I could definitely confirm that a lot of pesticides and synthetic fertilizers are being paid for by multilateral donors who are also financed by countries in the global north. And lobby work has ensured that our tax dollars are being used to pay for pesticides. And so there's good efforts on in many of the countries and from the multilateral agencies to repurpose some of these subsidies so that they can be used, for example, on organic inputs, that a farmer can get support for the seed that they need, or to, form a seed cooperative, or buy other inputs that they need, rather than not receiving any subsidy while their neighbor is getting a subsidy for their pesticides. So that would be a game changer, just as changing other subsidy programs in the global north from getting money because you have land to getting money because you take climate action or take biodiversity action would change agriculture literally overnight.
And it attests to why we need a organic certification program. And, I can see that PGS is, these participatory guarantee systems are very helpful, especially in areas where there isn't a good certification agency to help with that. Because just because you're a small local farmer, it doesn't mean that you're organic. And, one of our podcasts from Kenya was also attesting to that there is, there can be extreme chemical use on some of these small local farms.
Wow. Can I ask both of you to do a little more painting for me about where we want to be in terms of the international flow of potentially organics? One of the questions in the chat is about creating markets in the north for product from the south. And how do we think about that whether do we want to be replicating for much more local distribution, and what's the role of actually organics in larger international distribution? I think that's a question for you, actually, Paul, although you, Lindley, already explained that we need to be able to preserve our own stuff because we have to think more practically about the realities of growing food. But is there a market to move organic things around the globe? Is that part of our solution?
Yeah, it definitely is. I am a big supporter of local markets and local food sovereignty and supporting regional markets, and I'm working with this both in Europe and in Africa. But global trade is a key part. If we want to change the whole food system, we also need to be very present in global trade for organics. And for many small producers, the part of their crops that they may be multi-cropping, but if they have some products that can be sold at a much higher price on the global market, that's the difference between being able to send your kids to school and not send your kids to school. Or, starting a small, equipment cooperative or other things. The importance is to have fairness in those supply chains. And we have some great organic companies that are just doing amazing work, where we've seen in the Ivory Coast, we've seen, the price for cocoa in the country changed because one company started paying more for cocoa. And so companies can make a big difference when they start working in a more fair way. But yeah, I mean, it's a combination. We really do need both. But we need, as Anastasia was talking about earlier, stronger regulations allowing greater food sovereignty, because countries can't defend themselves and they can't defend resilient development of their food production under the current conditions. And then we've talked about this, how money to subsidies is directing things also in the same direction towards larger commodities and monocultures and so on. So but countries are fighting back and organizations are fighting back, and it is possible. So in terms of small markets, I mean, I'm a big believer in small is beautiful, but big can also be good. And, you know, like I've seen so many amazing, like 1 hectare farms, but I've also seen some really amazing farms with thousands of acres, that are really good organic farms and have some other opportunities in terms of biodiversity or agroforestry, other things, because they are larger. So I think we do need both.
I'm looking at questions in the chat from Dave of Real Organics. Thank you so much, Dave, for joining us. And so I think related to this question, Paul, you just said the ability to send your child to school may well mean you need to have an international market. And yet there may be limits to the scale that needs to be. I'm sorry that we have not had Dr. Miguel Altieri be able to join us. He was in transit, so we knew it was a risk. But a lot of his work is actually about making sure to stay embedded and connected in the viewpoints of peasant farmers. So protecting the development of those small scale farms that might grow to a certain scale, but we want to make sure that the conglomeration of power seems to be part of the whole practices that we're in trouble with. And then another question from Dave, farm to fork has no presence in Tanzania. But the USDA chemical ag has a huge presence. You'd mentioned that kind of effect. Have we discussed that enough, or is there more to be said about trying to lift up these alternative things to big ag?
I'll just mention Matima Juma. She's I'm actually going to see her next week. She makes some extremely good points about the hypocrisy of the European Union, because we've banned a whole lot of pesticides in connection with farm to fork and earlier. And the companies, largely from France and Germany, are just sending these same pesticides to Africa and around the world. So they're forbidden. Then if people use them, then their products can't be sold in the European Union because they have pesticide residues with forbidden pesticides. Plus people are just getting sick. I mean, it's unbelievable the amounts because of misuse or wrong use, lack of training and how to use these pesticides and so on. Just, you know, there's pesticide contamination. It's just outrageous. Montima has really focused a lot on that. They have, there will be an organic government desk in Tanzania soon, I'm convinced, through the national strategy that's been developed. One of the key needs there is to build capacity in organizations, but also in the government itself. So I'm hopeful on that point.
I want to touch on a couple things if I can, Grove.
Absolutely, please.
About scale, we have a 15,000 acre grain farm that grows, has like a 12-year rotation, you know, about 20 different grains in that rotation. They have wildlife buffer strips that run 30 feet between their cropping strips. And there's this kind of, I was talking about the greenwashing that comes from these large corporations, but one of them is that because you need more land to do what you do, you can't rewild then. You know, we're concentrating our poisons and everything in this small space and getting higher yields. And that means now we can return all of this land to rewild it. That's one of the messages that they like to say. And, this farm is Valika's farm in Montana, dryland farmers. They use these 30-foot buffer strips to catch more snow that blows across the farm, right? They're taller and it blocks the snow, and then they get, greater groundwater. So their soils have more water. They've got more organic matter because they've got these buffer strips. The wildlife, they have, migratory birds that are nesting in these strips. When they run the plow through, the animals have a place to safe haven during the, when they have to use the machinery. It's just, organic farmers can get really in touch with their land. They can, they actually are monitoring the migratory birds and the native plants, so they can actually increase all of this stuff. Yes, it's taking up more land, but this is real land stewardship, and it's that kind of intimate connection with your region and the understanding of how to farm that we need to really bring back. And it's not this, one size fits all and it replicates all over the world situation. And so we've partnered with a long-standing farmer-led. That's why these standards have to be farmer-led, because farmers understand what works in their region. And so Naturalend is an add-on to organic standard that we've partnered with, because of course we can't get coffee and chocolate and tea and bananas in Colorado or most of North America. So of course we need global trade. And we need to have very high integrity. And so that's where certification comes into play.
Thank you so much for that. It seems that our time has practically flown away. So, Lindley, does that work as a closing statement from you about?
Sure.
Fantastic, and I appreciate you defending my right to chocolate, because it's true. I do want to participate in the global bounty. Paul, would you like to say a few closing words, and then we'll shift back to Allison for a formal goodbye?
Well, yeah, I guess I would just say I believe change can happen. We can drive change. It requires that we change policy. So vote. We need politicians that are going to change the regulations to tame conventional agriculture and to support and build the alternative, organic agriculture. And it matters, buying organic is what makes it possible for farmers to transition to organic. So it's, use your power as a consumer, as a voter. Get your, workplaces to convert. Work at a hospital, get the hospital to convert its canteen. I mean, there's just so many things that can be done. But basically, there's really good practices and good cases around the world. And the goal now is just to spread all this good policy and good models for, small producers working together, gaining access to global markets, and spread those cases so we can transform our food system.
Thank you all. This has been really fascinating. I wish we could go on and on, because I have 100 questions, and I'm sure everybody else does. But I just want to thank all of you that are participating today in the program. And I want to thank Grove for a wonderful moderating job that she did. And of course, Lindley and Paul, I am just so happy to have the two of you to have a chance to talk together. It's been wonderful, and it's synchronistic that it worked out that Anastasia was able to give us a good beginning, a good overview. And, Paul, it's kind of funny. I was thinking that the Temple of Understanding puts together something we call Forum 2024 this year. And we were trying to, we planned to do this in October 10th. And we chose as a topic and a theme for our, this is our, big anniversary type thing: one vote, one planet. And we've got, we open with Vana Nashiva, who we always open with. But please, everybody, keep an eye out for the Eco Justice for All programs from the Temple of Understanding. And this has just been a fascinating, incredible discussion. And I know there will be more to come. So thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Grove, for having us.
Thanks so much, everybody. It's been great.